How's it going? And welcome to episode 245 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. I am Adam Howe, joined per usual by Kevin Hasting, and we got a great show lined up for you. I don't know why this popped in my head, Kevin. Maybe all right. So we TGFBI just got put in all of our grouping, all of our leagues or whatever, and Brett Ford, Chris Schwebsey over at Pitcher List, Christopher Weber are in my league, and so that's fun, And then I also have Clay Link. And so I made a comment. I'm like, oh, it's always good to have a former overall champion in my league. And then I'm like, oh, it popped in my head. I'm like, wait a minute. I've been talking to Kevin every single week for the last 5 years of also former overall TGFBI.
I think it's a good omen. I made that comment the year I was fortunate enough to win that overall. Okay. The Todd Zola defending champion was in my league. So it may be a good omen, Adam.
Yeah, they're okay. All right. I'll take it. But yeah, that'll be fun. That's a fun league, obviously, to be a part of. Raz Slam I almost forgot about Raz Slam, and then I saw an email that was just buried in my inbox. So I got into that, but I don't think leagues have been set for that yet. So.
I think next, if I remember right, it was 1 week after TGFBI.
Yeah.
So that'll be the following Monday.
So haven't set my KDS for that yet. Well,
don't take my word for it on that. If you're in Razzball, by the way, I did not look at draft date when I made that comment.
No, just sign up, set your KDS, and then when the draft starts, you'll get a notification. That's the way I look at it. But yeah, it's fun to just have, we talked about this in the last episode. It's fun to have all these drafts kind of all happening at the same time. We've got I'm coming up on my pick in our listener league. Let's see. I've got 2 picks until it. I was telling you, it's fun to be on the end. I was at the 15 spot in Glarf. I got the 1 spot here. So I feel like you can do more interesting, fun things or builds when you have the turn picks, or even like the 2 or the 14, just because you can basically pick back to back without having to worry about it. Yeah, you're going to have to push somebody up ADP if you really want them, because they're not going to make their way back to you after 2 more rounds. But it's interesting. Yeah, we'll see what I end up doing. But I just went back to back with closers. I might go back to back with catchers here just to kind of fill that in, but I'm not sure if I'll have the wherewithal to pull that trigger and not have any position players, not have any starters through the first 5 picks, and have to pick one of those first ones in the 6th round. So we'll see what happens. Luckily, I've got it all kind of outlined in the live draft assistant we talked about in the last episode as well. So it's nice to be able to kind of, I'm at that point where it becomes a little bit more relevant, because once you get to that 5th or 6th round, then you can start really leaning into the standings or the automatic standings that are calculated, into the cheat sheets, and really kind of like finagle your way. And I got 2 hours in between picks, and I've got the turn. So I've got 2 rounds between picks that I can really dive into all the information on that. So have that set up for TGFBI. Those are 4-hour picks. So, and I'm luckily, are you even on, is your Twitter account even active? I tried to find you on Twitter the other day, and it kept kicking me back with an error. I'm not on Twitter enough where I can't blame myself. I feel as though I'm getting a lot of, I try to message somebody, and all of a sudden it's like, no, you're not encrypted or this or that. I'm like, so anybody listening who has tried to DM me in the last year, there's a good chance I can't DM you back anymore. And I don't know why.
Most people find me on Discord or on Blue Sky these days. I did finally delete my Twitter account. It's just, it was getting so hard to sort through things and find the information I wanted, which was our fantasy baseball information. I'm still find that pretty easily on Blue Sky, but
Right.
if that gets difficult there, I'll delete that as well.
Yeah.
But it was just getting harder to find the information I was looking for. So no, I am not on Twitter at all.
Yeah,
and I think everybody has found me. I've got direct messages on Blue Sky that I used to get from people on Twitter. So yeah.
And there you get to use your true handle, your Chasing Wins handle at Blue Sky. So that's pretty cool. And then, honestly, the only things I ever read on Twitter are the things that get posted in the Discord's news channel. Or like,
and I can still see those.
And you can see them. Exactly. Oh man, sooner or later, Elon will figure out a way to not allow those to show up if you don't have a Twitter account. So we'll cross that bridge when we have to. That's, the Discord, all the different Discords, but the Pictureless Discord in particular is great for all of that kind of conversation you're actually looking for, the news you're actually looking for, all in one place with actual useful conversation. So highly recommend checking that out. Of course, PL Plus gets you into the Discord. PL Pro gets you the live draft assistant, and a bunch of other stuff, obviously, as well. But yeah, we filled our listener league really quickly because it was
thanks to John Wilder.
Yes. John, thank you so much sharing that information out in other Discords. We were
sitting on 4 out of 15. You, I, and the couple of people that had asked us if we were doing this season. You got it all lined up for us, and it was sitting there with us 4. And he posted it in Bubba in the Bloom Discord, and we were off and running before. I thought we still had 4 out of 15. It's great.
So if there's anybody out there listening that did not get in, that has played with us in the past, shoot us a message somehow, preferably in the Discord, but maybe I don't know
how. Hit me up on Blue Sky.
Yeah, hit Kevin up on Blue Sky. Because even though my name is still out there on Twitter, I'm very rarely ever checking it. I'm just gonna be honest with you guys. Sorry. We'll set up another league if we know we're gonna get 15 quick entries. Check us out, and then we can technically turn this back into an overall competition. So but we want to do that quickly because it is still going to be a slow draft, so obviously we want to get that started sooner rather than later. This episode should go out on Sunday. We're going to put these out back to back the first Sunday in March. So if we can fill that league in the first week of March, I think we can get away with it. And it's going to be a 2 hours clock per pick, but we all know that no one's going to take not many people are taking the full 2 hours, not on purpose, at least in our listener leagues. That being said, Kevin, let's get into it. We're going to talk about ratios today. We got our ERA, we've got our WHIP, and you talked a little bit about it in the last episode, but I want you to really dive into what are the targets of ratios that you're looking for throughout the course of the year. So like, where do you think you need to be in the top 5 in your league, top 3 in your league in ratios? And I want you to go on a little bit of a rant on the difference between a bad ERA and a bad WHIP ratio, because they don't always go hand in hand.
Oh, no, they definitely don't go hand in hand. Some of our elite pitchers that we're drafting in early rounds can be a concern in the one that they're not really good in. And others can be a help when we have other concerns and push them up. A guy like that, we're not going to talk about, he's drafted too early, but Shota Imanaga, I think is someone that I am more inclined to draft as a 3rd or 4th starting pitcher, where he's being taken just for that WHIP cushion. I am confident he's going to give me a good WHIP and help me out in that category. So when I'm looking at ratios for my pitchers that we're drafting late, I'm paying more attention to WHIP than ERA, because I have to force myself to. We know ERAs when we see them. We also know that past ERAs, yes, I will say all the time that after seasons of guys outperforming projections, but typically ERA can be very volatile as well. WHIP is very stable season to season for pitchers.
Right.
So we have a better idea before the season starts of the WHIP we're drafting than the ERA. So that's the other reason I concentrate more on it. I am not as confident that I know what a guy's ERA is going to be as I am his WHIP. And so when last episode you brought it up, when we were talking power and speed, how much batting average we have to pay attention to as well. When we're doing that on the pitching side, it's yes, both ratio categories, but I'm paying more attention to the WHIP because I think if you forget about that and you get off to a bad start to start the season, it's very, very hard to repair the WHIP because it's, walks plus hits per inning pitched, not earned run average, which is per 9 innings pitched. So they're accumulating more quickly. Sure, that means the guys we put in our lineup later get more innings more quickly as well, but we already have a much bigger denominator for our sample size, and it takes longer to get that to change. So yes, absolutely, I care about ERA, and we're going to talk about that in this episode, but I look at WHIP first.
Now, throughout the course of the season, we talk a lot about relievers that you can pick up on the cheap that can help stabilize these ratios, and the importance of trying to stabilize these ratios out throughout the year and not just in August, not trying to like make up ground in August and September when it's maybe too late, right? And of course, these are the only categories, along with batting average or OBP, if that's your game, where your opponent can come back to you as opposed to you having to leapfrog them, right? They can come back down. They can have a bad week. They can have a bad month. And all of a sudden, you can just tread water. And then all of a sudden, you're up 2 spots. So is it worth... if you know that's what part of your game is gonna be throughout the course of the year, are you just drafting that way as well? Like, are you gonna draft a middle reliever rather than spend the FAAB on them at the beginning, or is that a strategy that you find yourself utilizing mostly in the second half or in the middle of the season rather than at the beginning?
Well, we last episode we talked about opening weekend. We probably don't have enough starting pitchers on our roster, or a lot of us won't. Some will, but we may not have enough starting pitchers on our roster. So we'll be looking at some of these guys. And I think when it comes to protecting ratios, it depends on how the rest of your draft has went. If you got some of the high strikeout guys with good ratios, or even a little bit of a suspect, maybe they are really good in ERA, but they walk a few guys, their WHIP's inflated, or they have a really good WHIP and they have a home run issue, so their ERA is a little higher than we expect. But yeah, I'm going to try to use these guys. What I'm getting at is I think I may not use the relievers in my 7th starter spot or my 6th starter spot quite enough, because even just that 2 or 3 innings a week, it's not only that 2 or 3 innings of a 111 WHIP from a guy like Jeremiah Estrada. It's not having the 4 or 5 innings of a guy that went out there and put up a 1.5 WHIP and got blew up that game, right? So it's a much bigger difference than it appears. I think, yes, I'm chasing wins. I want starters when I have good matchups and I can get them in there. I think some of the ones I question, I'm going to be a little quicker to throw a reliever in that spot. And as we talked during the season, That doesn't mean we have to spend draft capital on them. It doesn't mean we have to spend a lot of FAAB money on them. You can make a list each week, take the ones that you land on. Very similar profiles. There are a couple of guys that, yes, they're going to be save specs. So people have on their roster. Yeah, absolutely. I'll draft those guys as a save spec, as someone that'll be in my lineup anyway. In fact, that's how we phrase it a lot of times. Would you take a spec on this guy for saves? If he has good ratios, then absolutely, because I'll use him in my lineup anyway.
Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about this with stolen bases and like how many stolen bases does somebody have to have for you to not worry about how much power they give you? Vice versa, the other way around. How many home runs does somebody have to hit to draft them in the first 3 rounds if they're not going to get you any stolen bases? Right. So how many strikeouts or win potential does a pitcher have to have for you to look the other way on these ratios and draft them early, hoping that you can make up ground later on? If there is a tiebreaker, and if there is a pitcher that comes to mind who's going early on that you're like, you know what, I don't trust their ratios, no matter what the projections say, but man, there's a lot of strikeouts. Like I've gotta at least consider how much, we just finished up our episode on strikeouts and wins, but that usually comes at the cost of ratios. How much can you weigh that pro and con, especially early on?
One that is just based on what you just asked makes it almost an impossible question because it just pulls at us from every different direction is Logan Webb. We know he's not a huge strikeout guy, but about a strikeout an inning. PLV has him projected for 196 strikeouts in 199 innings. So he's voluming his way there, just right at a strikeout an inning, but he's been giving us 200 innings a year. So we're getting all those innings, good ERA. Yes, we get the strikeouts. He goes deep into games. He's 3 seasons straight of 200 innings. So he goes deep into games to give us that ERA cushion, and that helps us. And then he's projected for 15 wins by PLV this season. That's amazing. But you have to go down to Dylan Cease before you see another guy projected for over a 1-2 whip.
Mm-hmm.
I have not been able to pull that trigger. Now I'm in a quality start league and it's a keeper league, and I have Logan Webb and absolutely love him because he goes 6 innings every outing. But in 5x5 redraft leagues, I have not pulled the trigger on Logan Webb, and I love him as a pitcher. But that whip, I guess to answer your question, once I see a 2 as the first number after a decimal or higher, that's not going to be my SP1 or 2.
So the name that pops out that kind of fits what you're talking about is Hunter Brown, at least as far as PLV projections go. 1.21 whip, 3.7.
I haven't drafted him.
ERA.
I've had him there in my queue and all these drafts where he's going, and I just can't pull the trigger for that.
ADP in the top 40 overall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, 7th starter off the board from my count. And like you said, there's just so many projected extremely low whips in the beginning of your draft,
and you need those
because they don't exist.
I didn't answer this question. In a 15-team FAAB league, I'm looking for a 116 whip. So we're not getting that later in the draft. So if you're drafting your ace with a 121 whip, you have a very difficult road ahead of you, right?
You're like drafting Cal Raleigh,
the whip we're looking for, and that's with your ace, your only pitcher in your lineup. So these guys down around a 1 that are going to throw 170, 180 innings, with the 1.08, 1.09. Some of these guys will have an amazing under 1 whip season. We're not projecting that for anybody, but you need at least one of those guys to get your whip where you want it for your team, because you're not going to get enough innings with a low enough whip later to bring it down when you draft your first couple of SPs with a high whip.
Now,
in my opinion, it's tough.
It is. Yeah. We talked about it before in the hitting side. It's like, if you don't give yourself a cushion in batting average, it's really hard to make it up. So if you start off with a Cal Raleigh or a Schwarber or somebody you don't think is going to get higher than a 230, that's hard, because you're not finding a whole lot of 300 pillows later on in your draft to help you out there that aren't going to hurt you everywhere else. So the other thing that I wanted to ask you about is this idea of like some of the quote diamonds in the rough, if you will, when it comes to ratios that you can get a little bit later. I'm not saying that much later. I'm talking about ADP of like around 100, 150, as opposed to in the first, 50 picks of the draft. Are guys that are currently injured expected to start the season on the IL? You've got the Zach Wheelers of the world. You've got the Carlos Rodons of the world. Like, you've got these guys that, when healthy, should be projected for. I mean, Zach Wheeler projection, PLV projections, he's a sub 1-1 whip, 1.093. I mean, PLV also has him projected for 157 innings. I don't, we'll see if he comes close to that. If he, starts as early as we're hoping he does, he might hit that. But like, the ratios are only as impactful to your team as many innings, as much volume as the pitchers are actually providing to you. This is why we stream these a lot throughout the course of the season, because you're going to get the same amount of innings out of these streamers as you are somebody who's going to be in your team all season long. They're just going to compound over the course of like 25 different guys, as opposed to one guy that you can trust. Anyway, what I'm really getting at is that how much stock are you putting into these injured pitchers who, again, when healthy, should be giving you your ratios, but you might have to stash them for a little while?
It's the reason I can't just leave the injured pitchers off my board, right? It's the reason I won't say I'm not drafting them. I try to draft less and less of them each year. The example I've been using recently was Brandon Woodruff for the past couple of seasons, because we kept hearing he was coming back and he didn't. It hurt so bad having him in that roster spot. But yeah, it's definitely very difficult not to think, man, if I get 4 months out of this guy, and it's not the wins and strikeouts I'm talking about at that point when I make that comment. It's that whip and ERA. It's the ratios, but especially the whip. I'm intrigued. You using Zach Wheeler as an example there. Several drafts over the past couple of weeks, top 100 now, 77, a 78 I'm seeing. We're getting good news. He's throwing off a mound already. Yeah, I think especially if we see him go out there during a spring training game, which I haven't heard that he will, but if we see him towards the end of spring training in a game, by the time we get to our
events,
big drafts last couple of weekends before the season starts, Zach Wheeler might be right up where we're used to seeing him in drafts. And I think it's because of that whip. That's so huge.
Yeah, and the thing is that you're not going to get full 6 months out of that whip, of that sub 1-1 whip, but you are going to get all of it, and then you're going to be able, at least where he's being drafted right now, even in just at 100, right? If you can get him at 100, you're going to be able to backfill, especially in a 12-teamer. You're going to be able to backfill in that roster spot with something that's not going to, be a 1-1, but it probably won't do enough damage to raise that 1-1 to a 1-2. Like, it's still going to be a sub, 1.2 whip when from that roster spot, when it's all said and done, that Wheeler plus whoever is filling in that spot throughout the course. Because really it's behoove of you to look at those 9 pitcher slots in an NFBC league or whatever your format is, and look at them as positions, right? Like we think about like, what are we going to get out of our second baseman? What are we going to get out of our third baseman? What have you? But on the pitcher slots, it's like, hey, especially in a roto league, you need to know what you're going to get out of each one of those 9 slots. And if Zach Wheeler is one of those 9 slots, obviously you need to fill that nine slot with somebody else for however long it's going to take. And so you're not going to get the 1-1 or the sub 1-1 from that spot, but you can do enough to keep that spot warm for that hopefully 1-1 spot that he gives you the rest of the season. And that could very well just be the spot that you rotate in a long reliever, or you stream a reliever in that spot until Wheeler is back, and then you just rotate in that. You listen to that section of the podcast throughout the season for another spot when somebody else gets hurt. So there's something else to be said about how you manage your roster throughout the course of the year, and you're not necessarily trying to rotate in, because I do think if you go into the season being like, this 9th spot I'm going to rotate throughout, I'm just going to continue to stream throughout the course of the season, I think you have more opportunity to fail with that mentality than if you just know that you can rotate people in when necessary, when there is an injury, when there's a terrible matchup. Knowing that there's at least a roster spot that you're using to rotate people in and out of, and not necessarily a starting lineup spot that you're continuously doing, because somebody else is going to get hurt and you're going to have to, now you're rotating 2 spots, right? Now you're rotating, you're trying to stream 2 different spots. Somebody else gets hurt. Somebody else has a bad matchup. Now you're rotating 3. So it's like you don't want to put yourself in that situation for multiple weeks at a time. I think the mentality of having that one spot that you're continuously rotating so that you can move, and then once somebody that's a little bit more stable, Nick talks about this all the time, especially in a 12-teamer, you want to be rotating a lot of spots so that you can stop. You're streaming so that you can not stream anymore.
Right.
Harder to do that in a 15-teamer. But if you're going to do it in a 15-teamer, you're going to do it early. And you got to do it often so that you can throw all the spaghetti at the wall and see which of those noodles actually sticks and which ones fall in the trash. But yeah,
I think the other thing, it correlates to what you were saying about oftentimes the pitchers projected for a nice whip available at this point in the draft are going to be guys coming off injury, or they're going to be some of the young pitchers that we don't know if we're going to see them or not, but we expect them to have good whips when we do. So in either event, many of our, I think it means pay really good attention to whip earlier in the draft, because the options that we expect a good whip from, we can always be surprised by guys and land on somebody that's even better than we expected. But these guys all have big question marks, and typically with the innings pitch that they're going to get early in the season, if we expect to see them in a rotation early in the season and they have a nice projected whip, they're getting drafted early.
Eno said interesting thought. I think it was during the crafts when they were on the craft with Nick. They're talking about NL pitcher storylines. These young pitchers that are coming up, if they are showing us very, very strong ratios coming up in the minors, like, don't take that as gospel. Because you got to think of the competition. You got to think of the hitters that they're facing throughout AA, even in AAA.
They've had ABS for a couple years.
And the ABS. And so when they come into the majors and all of a sudden you're like, hey, this is the guy who can keep the walks down, that had a great whip, et cetera, et cetera. That's not going to translate 1-to-1 when they come back up. When they come up, they're fight. Just like a hitter. They if they come up with like a 20% strikeout rate, you're not surprised if all of a sudden in their first couple weeks in the majors that they go up to a 30+ strikeout rate. It's a different world. It's a different set of matchups. Not everybody comes up and just is lighting the world on fire. They're not all the Paul Skeens of the world, right? More often than not, they do the complete opposite of that. And so when we see these young pitchers come up and we haven't seen them before, a lot of talk on Richie out of Atlanta, kind of forcing his way into the conversation of breaking camp with Atlanta, right? I don't know if it'll actually happen or not, but even if it does, it's exciting, but I am not putting a whole lot of stock into it. Definitely not putting a lot of. I'm not pushing him on my draft boards, especially in a FAAB league, because unless it's still going to be bottom 5 rounds of my of my draft, and I'm not going to feel bad about if it fails dropping him back into the heap, right? Because I do expect it to fail. Fail is it's too strong of a word, but I do expect it to have more speed bumps than I would like to deal with in my first month of the season. So yeah, I found myself straying away from young guys who have not proven past at least 2 months of the season. So like, I'll be okay with Nolan McLean, but like, I'm not going after, Richie, the Richies of the world, in Atlanta.
How about because these guys are all going in the same area of a draft. So like Yuri Perez, not much later is Mizorowski, these second year guys. And what do you think about them?
I have more concerns about Mizorowski than I do about Yuri Perez. I don't know if that's surprising anybody or not, but
I think that's probably the more common thought. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
Whitler would be in this group as well. Some of these guys.
Where is Perez? Yuri's going a couple pitchers.
Yeah, he's going earlier.
Mizorowski. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind it. Like, these are second year guys. Like I said, I'm okay with Nolan McLean. Like, I'm okay with guys who showed me something more than a cup of coffee.
Gotcha.
McLean's not much more than a cup of coffee when it comes down to it. Like, he was only up for 2 months, if that.
Yeah.
He just went on a run. And I've got him in a dynasty league, so I'm a little biased. I'm just holding on to that as well. But Mizorowski, I don't know. He seems a little bit more volatile than I would like, as far as like how long can he keep this up and not start destroying my ratios. So that's what I worry about with that. Yuri Perez, I mean, the only concern about Yuri Perez is the win opportunity with that team. So yeah, I mean, what's your feeling on that, on those guys, or on that type of players?
I've drafted on a couple of teams, pretty much all of these guys, trying not to get too many of them on the same team.
Sure.
For that concern. But they just, at times, watching them pitch just look really nasty. So I want them on at least a couple of my teams, trying not to get too many of them on the same team.
Yeah. When you do get too many of them, you probably kind of paint yourself into a corner where you can't, not that maybe you don't want to, but like you can't take your chances on similar type guys that are going later. Because it's like, all right, I kind of put my risk into Mizorowski, into Perez, or whatever. I'm kind of eyeballing the idea of Andrew Painter as, a common name that gets thrown around.
I knew that's what you were thinking when you said paint yourself into a corner. I knew exactly where you were going.
Yeah, all right. I'm glad you did, because I totally didn't. I didn't see it at all. But yeah, like, we wouldn't be able to talk about him later because he's going just inside that 325 range, ADP of 310 in the last month. in those 12-team online championships. But somebody who can, he's not projected to do well in the ratios, but he has been a control guy coming up through the minors, and again, doesn't always translate like we just talked about, at least not right away. But you can't take a risk on somebody like Painter if you already built up your risk with a lot of other young and or injured guys earlier on in your drafts. Do you prefer to build your risk with these kind of guys later, or are you okay missing out on that? If Andrew Painter comes up and all of a sudden he's amazing, you could have got him at 300 plus pick, but you couldn't because you'd rather go with the guys who at least have shown you something and pay up that price, because there is still risk, but there's probably a little bit less risk because you've already seen it.
Yeah. I like taking shots on, once again, one or two of these guys. And yeah, somebody like Painter, who's probably moving up quite a bit. We've been hearing more and more talk from the Phillies that they very well could be in the rotation opening day. In fact, it's starting to sound like they may expect that. I don't think he's going to be available at 300 much longer, so grab him now. And then hearing something like that before it actually becomes official, yeah, I start grabbing those guys in the drafts that I'm in, because it's definitely worth that shot when they're being taken at that point, unless I already had a specific plan in my draft and I know who I want for the opening weekend of the season, right? Because we're not going to draft these guys before the 28th, the 30th rounds. And so then I'll force myself to stick with that plan. But yeah, definitely we're taking a shot on these guys while they are less expensive.
Yeah. I mean, that's where you get your value, right? It's depending on what bin which clearance rack you are shopping in. All right. Well, let's get past. Before I move on, Kevin, any other overarching thoughts on these ratios, whether you're drafting them, you're trying to make up for it in free agency, before we get into some actual player targets post 325?
I don't think so. We talk about ratios and we're talking about other categories as well.
It's hard not to. It's like nah. I mean, you're trying to play an overall game. It's like we do this so that we can really focus on the category, but it's like one thing usually leads to another, and it's hard to completely filter it out. But we're gonna try, and we're gonna try to do so by looking at players that are currently at an ADP of 325 or later in online championships. Those are 12 teamers on the NFC BC platform. We'll do that right after this break. All right, Kevin, as I try to filter through my chart here to make sure I'm only looking at guys that are going past 325, that guys that are going to actually assist me my whip. So I'm going to start off with guys that have, all right, let's do a filter of at least 100 innings projected. Of course, I'm using PLV projections for this. These are guys that, in theory, will be in the rotation or in a starting rotation throughout the course of the year. Maybe they don't go always super deep into games. Maybe they fill in as a long reliever, but maybe they're more reliable to stay on your roster throughout the course of the year. The names that pop up, at least that'll help solidify. Let's go with whip. We want the low whip. That would be helpful. Top guy on the list here is Zach Eflin. That fits this little filter. And here's the thing: sub 100 or more innings projected, going past 325. The lowest whip projected to fit those filters still is at a 1.21 or 1.22 whip, right? And this is going to your point before. It's like you're not gonna get help in these categories later in your draft. You're just not gonna get help. It's stabilization that you're targeting. You said you're targeting 1.16. Nobody here is getting you close to that 1.16. They're just trying to tread water for you.
Exactly.
So is this even worth it? Like, is it even worth trying to target your, like, again, you're more than likely still targeting strikeouts and wins at this point in your draft and hoping it just doesn't hurt you too badly in these ratios.
Keep an eye on it. Exactly. That's what we want to do, is keep an eye on. We're typically looking for counting stats, right? When you're looking for the counting stats, don't hit that draft button until you've taken a look at the ratios.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Reed Detmers fits this mold. The one that fits this mold the best is Reed Detmers. 156 strikeouts with a 1.23 WHIP and a 3.55 ERA. 3.55 ERA, I'll take all day, right?
Mm-hmm. And at that point in a draft, that's about as close as you're going to get on a WHIP.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the best WHIP you're going to find, at least based on these projections. Of course, you project somebody a little bit better, fine. That's fine. Or use a different set of projections. That's on you. That's fine. Nick Martinez kind of fits into this mold with a little bit of higher ERA. And Mitch Keller kind of stands out a little bit. These ratios are so bad though. Man, it's hard. And I mean, this is why we have this conversation throughout the course of the year. It's like, all right, let's get these middle relievers. Let's get these setup guys that are going to come in, and maybe they have 3 outings and they get you 3 2/3 of innings. It might not be a full, that 6 innings that you're going to get out of your starters. So the WHIP's not going to be as impactful, but it works both ways. If they get blown up, it also won't be as impactful. And if they do great, then at least they're stabilizing, right? So yeah, I mean, all right, I gotta pass the mic, Kevin. Like I'm having a hard time finding a guy that is interesting on these. I gotta change my filters. What player might you be looking at to? I'm gonna stop saying the word help, because nothing is gonna help, but is going to stabilize or is going to be something worth swallowing when it comes to these ratios later on in your drafts.
I have 3 names because they are in my opinion, the 3 different types of players that we can find of starting pitchers. Yeah, we can always go the reliever route as well, but guys that we expect to be starters. I got an old boring guy. I got somebody coming off of injury, and then a young player that we expect could have a nice season and maybe outperform these projections. And I'll just list them all 3, and then we can discuss them, because there may be some correlation between the 3. My old boring guy is the first guy that meets our ADP criteria. Old boring Jameson Taillon. Typically, I think he's projected even on many of the FanGraphs pages for a 118, even below that 120. That's great. My injured guy, there's talk of him having a new pitch, and he was great last season, much better than the 2 previous partial seasons, coming back from his horrific injuries throughout his career. Mike Soroka in Arizona now. I believe he's projected in the low 120s, but he had a 113 in 90 innings last season. And we've seen him be amazing several years ago prior to those Achilles injuries, and then others that have happened since. And then Shane Smith is projected for a 120 on some of the projections. And that is what he had last season. I think my keeper league is on CBS. I think they have him for a 113.
Okay.
He meets this criteria. So one of each type of player. We got the old boring guy, and he is the one that I would want first, and he's being drafted ahead of the other 2, Jameson Taillon. We talked about him a lot last offseason for this very reason. A lot of innings with the decent ratios that can really help us. support them, right? Like you're saying, right? Stabilize them. Soroka, I like the talk I'm hearing about adding a pitch there in Arizona, and he got to 90 innings last season. So maybe we see 120, 130 of a similar whip to there at Taillon. And then when we get a young guy like Shane Smith that is actually being projected for a decent whip right off the bat, and he showed flashes of being really, really good last season, I'm going to be hopeful, right? Most of these projection systems are very conservative with their projections on young players. If they're already projecting him to be down there in the range where is about the best we can expect to find in ratios at this point in a draft, I'm definitely going to be hopeful that he can outperform that.
Yeah, I'm with you on the three that you mentioned. I'm all about Jameson Taillon of the three, mostly just due to the fact that the team he plays for.
Yep.
You're not
now you're bringing wins back into it. Yes.
I would say you're not drafting him for the strikeouts, but you are drafting him for the team defense. You are drafting him for pitching in Chicago in April is not concerning for me whatsoever. I'll even say May, also not concerning. Nick has been repeating this over and over and over again. The wind doesn't become a negative factor in Chicago, and the weather doesn't become a negative factor in Chicago until late June or July, when it's really starting to get hot. Otherwise, if anything, it's helping keep the ball in the field.
And some of the weird things that we saw with that stadium last season, I think it didn't get as hitter friendly on days when we expected it to. Sarah Sanchez was very vocal about that last season, about how weird Wrigley was playing. And even on days the wind blowing out, it wasn't really favoring the hitters that much.
Right. So shout out to Gularf member Sarah Sanchez. Once again, she's gotten back-to-back episodes, Sarah. Hope you're listening. But we have, the Cubs they're home. Their first two series, as they host they host Washington. They host Washington and they host the Angels. I know, let's say it 2 episodes in a row. You like the Angels offense lineup.
Not going into Wrigley in April to face Jameson Taillon. I don't.
Exactly. There you go. The Cubs are not one of the teams that have 4 games just in that first week, but they have an off day in that first week. They have another off day the second week. So they have a pretty spread out schedule, but nothing that's going to stop the Cubs from skipping anybody.
No, and if they're rolling 5 and a straight 5, that means we're getting that start versus the Angels, and then a 2-start week, the second full week of the season, probably.
Yeah, probably. So we'll see how that that's predicting 2-start weeks for the while spring training is just ramping up is probably a fool's errand. But it is nice to kind of look a little bit ahead. But more than likely, Taillon is not one of their first 3 starters, right? So that's the only thing when you're looking at this early schedule. You're not going to you probably don't get anything out of him. He's probably on your bench for that first week. And you're going to have to make sure you have some relievers in your bench that you can throw in there to make up the innings. But throughout the course of the first couple of weeks of the season, love it. Even as he the rest of the week, he'll be, if he faces the Angels, he probably doesn't get to go to Cleveland, but then he'll face Tampa in the Trop. That's nice, and then they host Pittsburgh. So. Yeah, that beginning of that schedule for the Cubs in general, but Taillon specifically, as we're talking about him, I'm a fan. So good call out there.
I already had him written down, and I just circled his name 3 times over here on my piece of paper when you went over that schedule.
It's nice.
That's nice.
To keep an eye on that schedule in that early. We talk about schedule
and I'm not
a
scared
lot
of
later
Cleveland,
on,
but that's probably the toughest one, the toughest series, and you'll miss it.
And you just fill them with something else, especially that at that point in your draft. It is interesting to see some the projection differences that you're talking about. You're talking about. I'm going to find Smith here now. Shane Smith isn't even on. He's not even showing up. He's not even showing up as an option. So that's cool. But like Taillon, not projected to have very good ratios by PLV. 1.3 WHIP, 4.7 ERA through 159 innings. So it is interesting to see the fluctuation in these ratios, even though innings pitch is pretty even when you're looking at different projections. So I think that's also worth noting as you're looking at, especially if you're on Fangraphs and you can see like 5 different projections side by side by side by side. Just look for the outlier and maybe figure out if you're going to trust that one or if you're going to trust the other 5 that are staring you in the face as far as those projections go as well. Now, as we're looking at schedule, it makes me that much more curious as to what other teams have a really favorable schedule at the beginning of the season that we might be able to find a 30th round pick in a reliever, in a setup guy, a middle reliever. Even we talked about Drew Anderson in the last episode with the Tigers, probably being that long reliever, or at least the first man up if one of the starters goes down. But that can be really beneficial in the right circumstances as well from a ratio standpoint. And now I'm trying to stall, so I'm trying to still find those that the schedule. I don't know if you still have it up, but is there any schedule that you've noticed as being a little bit more favorable that maybe we need to dive into a little bit more in this category?
Well, just the teams that we know that are playing 4 games that opening weekend. Let me see here. Looks like the Cubs. Is that right?
No, the Cubs have 3. All right, so I've got Cleveland, I've got Houston, the Angels, Seattle. We've got. Is that it? That's it. Yeah, that's it. That have 4 games in that first, this between the 25th and the 29th. So there's only a handful of teams that have the 4 games. Everybody else is either off Thursday or Friday. Nobody's off both, but everybody's off Wednesday except for the Yankees and the Giants. The Yankees have such a weird schedule to start the season. They play on Wednesday, and then they're off on Thursday, and then they play Friday, Saturday, and then they're off on Sunday. And then they finally play 3 straight at Seattle, and then they're off on the following Thursday of that week. And then they play a 3-game series, and they're off again. So the Yankees may not need a 5-man rotation until, I don't know, until the first week of April. Or like April 7th or 8th. So it'll be like their 4th series into the season before they might need a 5-man rotation. So they might be doing a makeshift 6-man rotation anyway, just due to their really wonky schedule throughout the course of the season, the beginning of the season. But yeah, the team Houston has a lot of games all in a row without days off. The Angels, same thing. All of these have 7 games to start their season without a day off. Seattle also fits in that boat. And Cleveland, all those teams that have 4, they play 3 straight in the following week as well. Though Cleveland is at Seattle and at the Dodgers. Houston is hosting the Angels and the Red Sox. The Angels are at Houston and then at Chicago Cubs. Seattle is hosting Cleveland and the Yankees straight through. So Cleveland, and maybe this is me being biased, has me eyeballing Matt Brash, who I grabbed at the end of my Glarf draft.
That's what I was thinking when you were talking Seattle with that schedule. Absolutely.
he's not somebody I'm too worried about in the ratios, but I would be targeting him for more on the strikeout side, and maybe I get a vulture save in the right circumstance as well. But if I'm eyeballing, any of those teams, I think it's Seattle, based on those matchups and based on their the rest of their bullpen and pitching situation. How about you?
Yeah, I agree. And like Houston, similar. The 4 games that opening weekend, Brian Abreu is being drafted too early to be a part of this discussion because of the concerns with Josh Hader. But if those concerns are correct, then that moves another guy up. And do we get a guy like Brian King? That would probably be the 8th inning guy. Probably. We don't know for certain that Abreu is automatically the 9th inning guy. They did use him last year when Hader was injured, but maybe they want to use Brian Abreu in the higher leverage earlier in the game whenever they need him. And sure, some of that would be closing. Does he get all the opportunities if Hader can't go? So I would take a shot on somebody like Brian King late in a draft for the reasons that you are outlining.
One of Nick's other flyers or sleepers or whatever term you want to use nowadays is also in Houston, and that is Ryan Weiss, who came over from the KBO.
Houston has announced they are going to start the season with a 6-man rotation,
which, for the most part with this rotation, especially with Amai being in there and McCullers existing, we're not too surprised on that. And Ryan Weiss, surprisingly, it's weird, has options, at least according to roster resource.
He's got 2 still.
So I guess he could get sent down, but coming over as a free agent from the KBO, I guess I'm just surprised at how that worked out with that contract. I don't expect him to be sent down, especially when you go out and sign that type of player. But how his success from the KBO translates back into returning to MLB, obviously we'll have to wait and see. But this was another flyer I made in my Glarf draft later on in the draft, who is not being drafted at all in 12-teamers, or at least not in the last month that I'm seeing, could very well be somebody. You're not going to get him in that first series. He'll fit in that same mold as Jameson Taillon. You'll get him in that second series, but because they do have so many games straight, you are, quote, guaranteed to get him at least once. And maybe you get lucky and he throws a bullpen session in that first series, but coming out of the bullpen, and then starts in the second series. Instead of throwing a bullpen behind the scenes, they just throw him into a game for an inning, as if he was still in spring training. So could also be a situation where you get lucky in that regard.
Yep.
But yeah, otherwise, Brian Abreu's great call out there, as far as opportunity goes. And I mean, there's not a lot of other guys in the Houston bullpen that I'm, itching to grab and throw in just based on that situation, especially in ratios. So I probably would, stick with Seattle, especially since I know I can get their setup guy a lot later.
Right.
Cooper Criswell, maybe as the long reliever, at least right now in listed there for Seattle, but they also acquired Jose Ferrer from Washington in the offseason. And not that he's a ratio play per se, but definitely a possibility of getting some extra innings in that first, especially as one of only 2 lefties in that bullpen. You'd expect him to get into plenty of situations, maybe not high leverage, but in this case, I'm just looking for innings and volume so that if he does do well in the right circumstances, he can help pad those ratios with some really good situations. But that does lead me to a question like, how much are you trusting specialists in this? And I don't think we talk a lot about this in season when we are looking at ratio guys to fill in FAAB, but like in theory, like, should we be focusing more on specialists to come in just kind of like a platoon, right? A platoon hitter. It's like, yeah, I'd only want Jock Peterson in when he's facing the right side of the platoon. He's gonna do more help to me when he's not playing against the wrong side. It should be that be more of a consideration when we're looking at pitchers in the ratios.
At times, I think often there won't be enough innings, but we're talking about relievers anyway. We're talking about trying to get 3 or 4 innings a week out of some of these guys, even just 3 for the guys that we really like with good ratios, typically only going 1 inning, and we're hoping to get 3 outings out of them in a week. So yeah, absolutely, it's worth taking a look at. We mentioned last episode when we were talking wins and Ks, the followers are going to have the better chance at win if they have nice ratios. That's a definite added boost, and we're looking at a few more innings than most of our relievers. We may get, if they get 2 outings, we may get 5 or 6 out of them. That's a few more strikeouts, more opportunities for win. And if they have those nice ratios, the guys you were mentioned earlier in the show, Adam, getting the strikeouts, Jeremiah Estrada, we've seen him have over 100 strikeouts. He's projected for like a 1.13 whip. So he's another one. But yeah, the so-called specialists, absolutely. If we have a good indication of whatever their specialty is coming up, and we're going to see them get those innings to give us those opportunities.
Yeah. I keep looking at this whip leaderboard past 325. I'm just like, oh man, I'm scared.
Yeah, it gets bad pretty quickly.
That escalated quickly. Yeah, just it's rough out there, man. It's rough out there. It's like the job market. But I mean, guys find their way into this. We talk about it, it's like there's always going to be that guy that's like the Brent Suters of the world that have that one season. You're like, what, how, where, and then you can't replicate it. He can't replicate it the next season. You have no idea who's going to be until it's too late most of the time. Any care to give like a guess of somebody that you think is going to be that guy that's like, man, I'm going to get, it's the wrong episode. I should have brought this in the last episode, because what I'm talking about is the guy who's going to vulture his way into, double-digit wins before, the All-Star game, out of a relief position. But it becomes such a difficult thing to predict. And then by the time you kind of see the pattern happening, it's probably too late.
Right. But if you see a pattern of the guy coming in the 5th or 6th inning, right? The teams may have that 7, 8, 9 down. They'll have some variance, but they'll have a fairly standard last 3 guys of the game, as long as they're all rested. But when you start seeing the same pitcher come in to a close ball game, 5th or 6th inning, tie game, down 1 run, those are the guys. The team takes the lead while they're in there throwing an inning or 2 as the first guy out of the bullpen. Absolutely, those are the guys we're looking for. You mentioned Brent Suter a couple of years ago, and I brought this up with Ariel Cohen a couple of years ago. If he had found anything predictive on who those pitchers might be, and his answer was draft starting pitchers for your wins. Right. It's really not predictive. But we look at some guys. Jason Adam had 8 wins last year. Right. And that's what we're talking about. I think Brent Suter got to double digits the season we're talking about. Lucas Urseg had 8 wins last year. Right. Also, if you have teams that, I don't know if this is something that we can really rely on, though, but there are teams that get going in a year where they play good ball late in the game, right? We start seeing teams that the teams that win a lot of one-run games, the teams that come from behind a lot. Absolutely, you're going to want one of their setup guys. They're the type of guys that can fall into exactly what we're talking about. Unfortunately, I haven't found, and when I talked to Ariel a couple of seasons back, he hadn't yet either anything predictive in finding these guys other than, as you mentioned, just watch for these trends early in the year. One that I would expect we would see this from again, had a 3.3 ERA last season. Let me see what his whip was really quick. Oh, that page won't open, but Kinkerine had 8 wins.
Yes.
He's going to be in pretty much that same role he was last season with Philadelphia.
I would have ventured, yes.
Yeah. So I may take that, might bump him up above a couple of the others on my board when I'm looking at these types of guys late or for that opening weekend. Yeah, Philadelphia trusted him in that spot last season. They seem to be in a very similar situation. I would guess they would trust him in that spot as well. So I'd probably give him a bump over some of the other relievers that we don't expect to see in the 9th inning.
The other thing that I might be looking for is, average age or overall age of the starters, the starting rotation, and a team that's going to be putting out a much younger rotation, maybe a little bit more willing to pull them a little earlier, not let them go through to, either they're holding on to their innings or they don't trust them to go through the order more than 2 times. Or I might be completely off and they may be like, you know what, we don't have another choice. We have to let these guys just go out there and figure it out over a long period of time. But that tends to be on teams that are rebuilding or are not expected to win a lot of games. So St. Louis, Washington, they're the ones that come to mind, at least at first. Washington's rotation not as young as I thought it was when I first pulled this up, with Brad Lord being the youngest guy on this roster at 26. But St. Louis is a little bit on the younger side, younger than that. So might be something worth looking at. It's like, hey, if you are seeing a team that is more willing to pull their starters early, even in games that are close, but they're giving up a lot of runs, but their offense is holding their own, and they're down 4-5, but they're still going to pull their starter in the 4th. You might want to look at who. Again, I like the idea of who's the first man up rather than who's a setup guy. Like, who do they trust to bring in when it's still a close game, but it's not near the end of the game. And that gives them more opportunity to vulture those wins if their offense can pull it together and bring them back out of the hole.
Yeah,
so those will be situations we'll be looking at throughout the season as well.
Adrian Morjan had 13 wins last season. That's crazy. You know how many wins Chris Sale had in 125 innings?
8?
7.
All right, yeah.
And there's several of these guys. Can we figure out a way to pick them out? Probably not. But like I said, we may be able to discover it early in the season. Edwin Uceta had 10. Right? I'm just going down the wins list for the guys that didn't have triple-digit innings.
Uceta had 10 mostly because he was being used in tie games toward the end of the games or in extra innings. And
extra innings is another good one.
Yeah, I mean, that's how you. How do we turn this back into our chasing wins episode, Kevin?
Well, these guys, right, typically have a much better. These guys have better ratios than 4 and 5 starters for most teams. That's why we're talking about them.
Sure.
And then if they're in the position or that they'll get an opportunity to maybe get us a win or a save, depending on the situation, that's an added bonus. But yes, stabilization of whip is when we talk about these guys on our episodes all season long, whip and ERA in our ratio category. is when we typically look for them. But yeah, we're greedy and we're looking for wins like the 8-gram Ashcraft gave us, you know.
You gotta be greedy. Some of the relievers that are popping up, at least that are going to give me some decent ratios, at least PLV projecting them to. Tanner Scott, obviously not in the closer role anymore, but he should still get you plenty of strikeouts. And if he hits this projection on a 1.19 whip, won't hurt you there either. Where was it? There was another one. Lucas Giolito is probably not helping anybody in the ratios at this point, but he's not helping anybody because he's still not signed. So are you willing to, in a 15 teamer, in a draft and hold, are you drafting Lucas Giolito anywhere?
Yes, I'm confident he gets a job.
All right.
Yep.
Why hasn't he had a job yet? It seems, from what I heard at one point, it's just basically he's waiting for, he wants to play he either wants to play in the right situation, like a winning team, or he wants to get paid, but one or the other, and neither one of those is actually happening right now.
Somebody will get hurt on a contender, so he'll at least have that option.
Yeah,
he'll have the good team option at some point.
Yeah. Somebody unfortunately will get hurt. All right. Well, Kevin, any other names that we haven't talked about that we probably should have, and or any other words of wisdom when it comes to these ratios that we're always going to have to keep in the back of our mind throughout the course of the season? Is probably the hardest thing to manage in the entire season.
You just said it. As far as I'm concerned, once again, everybody listening knows these things, but a nice little reminder. Yeah, just always keep it in mind. Like you just said it. We're looking for wins. We're looking for strikeouts. We're looking for that nice ERA. Don't forget about whip. It's very difficult, and awesome pitchers, some of them we talked about earlier in the episode, can have a bit of a whip issue, and that can really set your team up and put it in a position where that you can't recover from. If the best pitcher or two on your team are putting whips up, a good 5 points above our target, you're not going to find guys later to bring it down. We're looking for guys later that have that whip just to stabilize, as you were saying. So in my opinion, this is something that you really have to take into consideration throughout the entire draft, so you don't have to worry about it as much when we get to this point.
Exactly. And the less you have to worry about throughout the season, the better, because you're going to have to think about something. All right.
Yeah, you want that ERA and whip where you don't care. You want that, Colorado's coming to town. I don't care what this guy's ratios are. I'm going to get a win. That's what we're hoping for. So we want to draft a team with the ratios good enough that we can do that later in the season.
You can make those decisions, right?
Yep.
Well, after all that, it's going to wrap it up for episode 245. Kevin, 245. We're only 5 away from the magic 250. It's an arbitrary.
That's going to be about number. The time that's going to about line up when FAAB starts.
It really might. We've got, we've got to do saves for category previews. We'll
got to do your favorite
wild card episode. Absolutely. So that'll be at 246, 247, and then we got 48, 49, and 50. So if not the first week of FAAB, right near the start of the season. So good way to kick it off. But for now, that's going to do it for 245 of On the Wire. I am Adam Howe. On behalf of Kevin Hasting, thank you for listening, and we bid you goodbye.